My name is Elena Morgan Carter, 34 years old. The phone on my desk rang only once before I picked it up, a thin red line blinking on the console like a target. Major Carter, a calm voice said. This is Attorney Hayes. I represent General Robert Morgan. He's dying. He wants to see you. For a beat, I heard everything and nothing. The fluorescent hum, the tap of distant keyboards, cadence echoing from morning PT outside, then the words tunneled through all of it and took root. Excuse me? I said. You've got the wrong person. Papers on my desk whispered under the air conditioning, the half-finished readiness report staring back like a reprimand. Hayes didn't rush. He said you'd say that. Something long locked inside me rattled against its hinges. There are plenty of Morgans in the service, I said flatly. Plenty of dying men. He didn't argue. There's only one Robert Morgan who asked for Elena Morgan Carter. I hung up without meaning to and sat there, hands still in the air, feeling the room widen and recede. Outside my window, the drill field at Camp Pendleton looked ordinary, formations breaking, boots in rhythm, dust rising like breath. Inside, the words replayed, He's dying. He wants to see you. I'd spent my life saluting the idea that facts were solid ground. The facts said both my parents died in a car crash when I was 4. The state certified it. The orphanage repeated it until it became scripture. Duty replaced blood. The Corps became the only family I trusted to keep its promises. By 1800, the report was finished, and I couldn't read a single word of it. I went home to base housing and stood in my quiet kitchen, the flag on the wall exactly straight, the counters clear, the white noise of the fridge, the only heartbeat. I opened a cabinet and pulled down a small tin box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, a hospital bracelet with a number I'd memorized without trying, a faded photo of a Marine officer holding a bundled infant, a small silver locket shaped like an eagle. On the back of the photo, in blue ink, a message I never understood, for EGM, always safe. I used to tell myself I'd found it in a donations pile at the orphanage, liked the uniform, liked the way the officer held the baby like something both heavy and holy. I set the photo beside the sink and traced the crease down its middle. Morgan. I said it aloud once, and the name sat in my mouth like a memory I couldn't place. I remembered a 4th of July parade when I was 12, how the Marines rolled past in a convoy, flags striking the heat, how a man in the passenger seat caught my awkward salute and returned it with a smile that landed like recognition. I'd told myself I invented the moment. Hunger can do that to a mind. At 2100, I called the number back. Mr. Hayes, I began, and he answered like he'd been waiting in a room without windows. I was hoping you'd call, Major. I walked to the window, palm against the cool glass. I don't know what you're expecting. I don't even know this man. He knows you, Hayes said softly. He's followed your career. He said you'd understand when you saw the house. I almost laughed. The house? The Morgan estate in Arlington. Can you come today? I looked around at my life. No photos on the walls except institutional ones, one pothos plant that kept dying and coming back because it didn't know better, a duty roster on the fridge like a promise. Yeah, I said finally. I can come. The flight east was uneventful. My thoughts weren't. Discipline teaches you to compartmentalize, stack emotion in neat labeled boxes, and slide them onto a high shelf. But turbulence has a way of jostling things loose even when the plane is steady. I closed my eyes and saw the lettered band on the hospital bracelet, the blue ink initials, the officer's hand cupped under a baby's head. EGM. Elena Grace Morgan? I shut the lid of that thought so hard it echoed. At Reagan, a driver in a gray suit held a sign that read, M. Carter, as if he didn't want to presume more than the initial. He offered a polite nod and opened the door without questions. The city thinned into suburbs, then into long drives and old trees swallowing the sky. When we turned onto a gravel lane lined with oaks, the car tires crackled like static. At the end of the road stood a mansion with white pillars and iron gates, and an American flag at half-staff. The place didn't look lived in so much as inhabited by history. Hayes waited under the portico, coat too thin for the November air, eyes that knew grief professionally. "Thank you for coming, Major," he said, offering a firm, unassuming handshake. He's very weak. I kept my voice even. I'm only here to clear up a mistake. He nodded once, accepting my terms with a small flicker of something like relief. Understood. Before you go up, there's something you should see. The air inside smelled like polished wood and antiseptic, the past and the present negotiating armistice. Oil portraits marched down the hallway. Men in uniforms, spanning a century, the same jawline set into different wars. I refused to find myself in any of those faces. Hayes walked ahead, shoes making no sound on the runner. He commissioned a few pieces last year, he said quietly, almost to himself. Said the house felt cold. We turned a corner and he stopped. Light fell through a tall window across a wide stretch of wall. For a second I thought I was looking into a mirror warped by time. Then I saw the brushstrokes. The portrait was large and exact and impossible. Me in marine dress blues, cover under my arm, sword at my side, ribbons precise. Even the tiny scar above my right eyebrow, a training accident I carried like punctuation, had been captured with absurd fidelity. The artist had painted from a photograph, a public one by the look of it, but the gaze wasn't the photographer's. It was someone who knew where to stand to see pride and pain at once. My mouth went dry. Where did this come from? I asked, barely hearing my own voice. An artist in Boston, Hayes said. The general commissioned it, said it was for his daughter. I kept my eyes on the canvas, afraid that if I blinked the person inside, it would step forward and ask me where I'd been all this time. The house was silent around us, the kind of silence that listens. Somewhere above, something mechanical hissed and settled. This proves nothing, I said, and it didn't. But proof and truth don't always share a bed. Of course, he replied gently. Maybe what's upstairs will. We stood in that quiet for one breath longer than was comfortable. Then I stepped closer to the painting, until I could see the faint ridges where the brush had dragged through white for a shine on the sword hilt, until I could smell linseed and varnish under the wood polish, until I could feel my own gaze turn back at me. The woman in the portrait looked like someone who had made a temple out of standing alone. I didn't know whether to salute her or tell her to stand down. Behind me, Hayes's voice softened. He was afraid you'd never come. He wanted one room in this house that said you existed here. I thought of a girl on a curb saluting a passing convoy, a man returning it the way you return a secret. I thought of a locket in a tin, of blue letters I'd pretended not to recognize. I thought of the word orphan, which had always felt less like a fact and more like a sentence someone else handed me to read aloud. I didn't trust my voice, so I nodded once, as if acknowledging an order. The stairs waited, carpet the burgundy of old blood. I kept my shoulders square and my pace measured, like every inspection I'd ever passed depended on it. At the landing, I turned back for one last look at the portrait, needing it to be only paint and not prophecy. It wasn't only paint. The staircase curved upward like a spine, each step cushioned, but loud in my head. Hayes followed behind at a respectful distance, his voice hushed as if afraid to disturb something sacred. He's waiting, he said quietly. He tires easily, but he's lucid, most of the time. The second floor smelled of lavender and disinfectant. The hum of medical equipment replaced the creak of floorboards. A nurse in pale scrubs passed us, her face drawn but kind. She nodded to me, whispering, "He's been asking if you'd really come." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure if I had. Hayes gestured towards a half-open door at the end of the hall. He's in there. I took a slow breath, squared my shoulders, and pushed the door open. The room was dim, filtered sunlight cutting through gauzy curtains. Machines whispered rhythmically in the corner, blinking in green and amber. On the bed lay a man who looked both familiar and foreign, a monument reduced to breath. His hair was silver, his skin pale parchment stretched over bone, but the eyes, sharp and calculating, still carried command. For a second, I forgot how to move. "Major Carter," Hayes said softly. "This is General Robert Morgan." The man stirred. His voice rasped, but carried authority, even now. "Elena," he whispered, "you came." I froze. My name sounded different in his mouth. Heavy, deliberate, known. "I didn't come for you," I said, forcing calm into my tone. "I came because someone lied to me." He tried to smile, but it faltered into a grimace. "You have your mother's fire." "I don't have anything of hers," I shot back. "She died when I was 4. His eyes softened. "She died because of me." The words hit harder than I wanted them to. I stepped closer despite myself. "What do you mean?" He shifted, wincing with the effort. "You were in danger." After the mission in 91, Amber Torch, they made threats. Real ones. The kind that don't fade. We had to disappear you. It was the only way. I felt something twist in my chest. Disappear me? I repeated, disgust threading through disbelief. You buried me alive. You let the world think I was dead. It was the only way to keep you safe. I laughed once, dry and sharp. And how exactly did growing up in a state orphanage make me safe? You call that protection? He met my gaze without flinching. It made you strong. The arrogance in that answer almost broke me. I took another step forward until I stood at the foot of his bed. You don't get to take credit for the person I became. His lips trembled faintly. You're right, he whispered. But I hoped you'd understand someday that everything I did to keep you breathing. I wanted to yell, to shake the frail frame until truth spilled out. But the longer I looked at him, the less he resembled a monster, and the more he resembled a man who had spent decades trapped in his own guilt. The nurse returned, checking his pulse. He needs rest, she murmured. I'm fine, he rasped. 5 more minutes. She hesitated, then slipped out. Hayes stood by the door, silent, his hands folded. The general turned his head toward me again. I followed your career, he said softly. Every mission, every medal. I have all your records. You became everything we dreamed you'd be. Don't say we, I snapped. You don't get to claim that word. He closed his eyes briefly. Your mother wanted you to have a normal life. She believed if you were hidden, you'd grow up free of enemies. She was right about danger, wrong about what it would cost. I took a step back, arms folded. So that's the story then? You buried me to save me? He coughed hard, his whole body trembling, and I hated myself for noticing how fragile he was. Sometimes, he whispered, love looks like betrayal. Then maybe you loved me too much, I said, voice low. He smiled faintly, eyes glinting with something between pride and regret. You sound just like her. The nurse re-entered, giving me a look that said enough. He needs to rest now. Hayes touched my arm lightly. Come, he murmured. But before I could move, the general spoke again, his tone hoarse, urgent. There's a letter, he said. On the desk. Hayes will give it to you, for when you're ready. I didn't want anything from him, but I also couldn't look away. His hand trembled toward me, stopping halfway in the air. I stared at it, a hand that had signed orders, commanded battalions, built walls higher than I could climb, and felt the anger start to fracture into something I didn't have a name for. Then the machines beeped in protest, and the nurse hurried forward, adjusting his oxygen. Time's up, she said gently. I turned without saluting. Old habits faltered when the person in front of you wasn't a superior officer, but the ghost who made you an orphan. Outside, Hayes waited by the door, holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. My name was written in a steady military hand. He wanted you to have this, Hayes said quietly. He wrote it years ago, for when you came home. I stared at the seal, the red wax smooth except for one shallow fingerprint in the center. Do you think he's telling the truth? I asked. Hayes hesitated. I think he believes he is. I didn't take the envelope at first. My hands wouldn't close around it. When I finally did, it felt heavier than paper should. Downstairs, the hallway seemed longer than before. The portraits watched as I passed, each one a ghost with the same jawline and the same eyes. Outside, the sky had dimmed to pewter, clouds pressing low over the trees. Somewhere distant, thunder rolled. Hayes opened the door for me. He'll rest now, he said. He may not have much time left. I nodded, slipping the envelope into my coat pocket. The air outside tasted like rain and iron. When I looked back, the mansion's windows glowed faintly, like tired eyes refusing to close. I stood there for a long moment, the letter a weight against my heart, and finally whispered, what if this isn't protection? What if it's just guilt wearing medals? The wind didn't answer, but somewhere behind those glowing windows, a dying man was whispering my name again. I didn't open the letter right away. It sat on the nightstand in my hotel room like an accusation, its wax seal catching the light every time I turned. The rational part of me wanted to file it away as just another classified document, something to review when emotions cooled. But rationality has a half-life, and mine was running out. By midnight, I gave in. I pulled my pocket knife from my belt, the same one that had been to 3 deployments with me, and slit the seal cleanly. Inside were 4 items, each tucked neatly together like evidence. A folded letter, a birth certificate, a faded photograph, and a military commendation stamped with the Department of Defense seal. The birth certificate came first. Elena Grace Morgan, born Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth, Virginia. Parents, Robert A. Morgan and Laura E. Morgan. I stared at the page until the words blurred. It wasn't the name I'd been living under, the one the state assigned me when it lost my file in some bureaucratic shuffle. This was a name someone had hidden like contraband. Next was the photograph, a young Marine officer holding a baby swaddled in white. Beside him stood a woman with auburn hair and soft eyes. My mother. She wasn't smiling at the camera. She was smiling at me. The edges of the photo were worn, as if handled too often. The commendation bore a familiar signature, General Robert Morgan. A recommendation for promotion dated the same week I'd enlisted. He'd signed it the day I became a Marine. Coincidence? No. He'd been watching me even then. Finally, I unfolded the letter. The handwriting was clean, deliberate, the kind of script forged by decades of command. Elena, if you're reading this, I've run out of time to tell you in person. The world I served in was not kind. After your mother's death, threats were made, real ones. I believed the only way to keep you alive was to hide you, even from myself. I watched your career from afar. Every commendation, every mission report, I knew. You carried the name I couldn't give you, but you earned the honor I could never take away. Forgive me, if you can. Robert Morgan. I folded it back carefully, my hands trembling. The anger I expected didn't come, not yet. Instead, there was a hollow ache, like the space after an explosion before the sound catches up. Outside, the city lights blinked against the dark, steady, and indifferent. I told myself the letter proved nothing. It could still be fabrication, a story built for sympathy. But I couldn't shake the detail about the promotion date, or the way the handwriting matched the note on the photo. For EGM, always safe. The next morning I called Hayes. He answered on the first ring. You read it, he said, not as a question. I want to know if any of it's true, I replied. There was a pause. Meet me at the cafe downstairs. Bring the letter. When I arrived, Hayes was already seated, a thin folder beside his coffee. He looked older in daylight, the lines around his eyes deepening, like maps of all the secrets he'd carried. I promised the general I wouldn't interfere, he began. But after last night's visit, I think you deserve context. He slid the folder toward me. Declassified reports. Pages stamped confidential. Released 2012. The header read, Operation Amber Torch, Joint Task Group, Atlantic Command. I scanned the document. Dense blocks of text, half of it blacked out. Then a paragraph stopped me cold. Subject, General Morgan and family received credible threats from insurgent remnants following the 1991 rescue op. Targeted attacks on dependents reported. Protective relocation recommended. Classified termination event staged to protect minor child. I felt the air drain from my lungs. Termination event, I said slowly. It means your death certificate was faked, Hayes said quietly. You were relocated under a sealed identity. Only 3 people knew the truth. The general, his aide, and the base commander. I closed the file, knuckles white. And my mother? She knew, he said. She agreed until she didn't. She died 2 months later in a car accident. I leaned back, staring at the coffee I hadn't touched. So that's it. They buried me to save me. Hayes's expression softened. He believed he was doing the right thing. You have every reason to hate him for it, but don't doubt the intention. I shook my head. Intention doesn't erase the orphanage. It doesn't undo the years I thought nobody wanted me. No, he said simply. It doesn't, but maybe it explains why he never stopped watching. The hum of the cafe faded into static. Through the window, I saw my own reflection. Uniform crisp, posture perfect, eyes hollow. How do you grieve a man who's still breathing? I gathered the documents, sliding them back into the envelope. Tell him I'm coming back, I said. Hayes's brows rose. He's weaker now, Major. You might not get the confrontation you're expecting. I don't need a confrontation, I replied, standing. I need answers. The drive back to the estate was longer this time, or maybe the road just stretched to match my thoughts. The sky was bruised gray, the kind of weather that sits heavy in the air before rain decides to fall. By the time the mansion appeared between the trees, my heart had settled into the same rhythm as the wipers. Steady, relentless. The gates opened on their own. I parked at the base of the stone steps, the same ones I'd climbed 2 days earlier. The air smelled of wet leaves and iron. Inside, the nurse looked up, startled. He's been asking for you, she said softly. But he doesn't have much strength. I'm not here for comfort, I said. She nodded, understanding more than I'd said. I walked the corridor to his room. Each portrait along the wall seemed to watch me, their painted eyes heavy with judgment. When I reached his door, I didn't knock. The general was awake, propped against pillows, a thin blanket pulled over his legs. He looked smaller than before, as if guilt itself had been keeping him alive, and now that I knew the truth, it had started to let him go. I read the letter, I said. He smiled faintly, eyes glassy. Then you know everything. Not everything, I said. I know you falsified my death. I know you watched me grow up through reports and photographs. What I don't know is why you let it stay that way. Why didn't you ever come back? His gaze shifted to the window, because I thought you'd be safer never knowing. I stepped closer. That wasn't your choice to make. He nodded slowly. You're right. Do you even realize what you took from me? My voice cracked, anger seeping through discipline. Every family photo I never had, every birthday I never celebrated. You gave me a life, but you took away its meaning. He looked at me then, really looked. I gave you survival, Elena, and you turned it into strength. That was your doing, not mine. I wanted to hate him, to end the conversation there, but the tremor in his voice, half command, half confession, made my resolve stumble. I don't want your praise, I said finally. I want my history back. You already have it, he whispered. Now do something with it. The nurse appeared at the doorway, eyes gentle but firm. He needs rest. I didn't move. So do I. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the man who hid his daughter for love and the woman who came back for the truth. Then I turned to leave, the envelope heavy again in my pocket. Behind me, his voice drifted faintly through the hum of the machines. Forgive me if you can. I didn't answer, but I didn't walk fast either. The house was quieter than before, like it knew the truth had already broken something inside its walls. Even the rain outside had softened to a hush. When the nurse closed the door behind me, I found myself standing in the hallway without direction, only the weight of unanswered years pressing down. I wandered, almost unconsciously, until my hand brushed a door handle. It turned easily. The room smelled of old paper and cedar, the kind of scent that clings to memory. It was a study. Stacks of binders filled the shelves, each labeled by year in neat block letters: 2004, 2005, 2006, and so on. On the mahogany desk sat a brass lamp, a framed photograph of my mother, and an unopened bottle of whiskey that had probably been there longer than I'd been alive. The air carried that stillness reserved for rooms built around regret. I stepped closer. On the desk lay a folder stamped "Classified, Do Not Remove." The paper inside was yellowed, edges curling. I hesitated, then opened it. Every page carried my name, Carter, E.G., mission reports, performance evaluations, commendations. Each one was annotated in pencil. The notes were precise, almost clinical. Excellent leadership under pressure. Tendency toward isolation. Reminds me of Laura when she argued orders at Quantico. Still wears the locket. She doesn't know yet. My chest tightened. He hadn't just watched from a distance. He had studied me, tracked every move, every deployment, every word printed under my name. He'd built an archive of a daughter he never met. I sank into his chair, the leather sighing beneath my weight. The desk drawer on the right was locked. After a brief search, I found a small key taped behind the photo frame of my mother. Typical military thinking. Hide something where it looks obvious, so no one questions it. The drawer opened with a quiet click. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to me, none ever sent. The earliest was dated 1995, the year I turned 10. I unfolded it carefully. You started 5th grade today. I saw your school photo in the local paper. Front tooth missing, still smiling like your mother. I wish I could have told you that gap-toothed grin looked like courage itself. Another letter, 2003. You enlisted today. I saw the announcement, the photograph, the way you saluted the flag before walking inside. I wanted to run to you, but I told myself the danger hadn't passed. Maybe I just didn't know how to stop hiding. And another, 2009. Your first deployment report came through. Your team calls you steel. You always were tougher than I deserved. I hope someday you'll understand that distance was my punishment, not your burden. By the 5th letter, my eyes blurred. 30 years of words never spoken, all written to a daughter he believed he'd lost by choice. There was a smaller box behind the stack of letters. Inside was a single silver star, engraved with his name. Beneath it, a note in the same clean handwriting. For her, when she's ready. I wasn't sure if I wanted to laugh or cry. He'd tried to turn guilt into inheritance. The sound of footsteps pulled me back. Hayes appeared in the doorway, his expression caught between apology and caution. "He's asking for you," he said softly. "It might be time." Time. The word landed heavy, final. I followed him upstairs again, the same path as before, but slower. The rhythmic beeping from the machines was weaker now, uneven. The nurse looked up when we entered, eyes tired. "He's been waiting." The general was awake, barely. His chest rose in shallow intervals, his fingers twitching against the sheet as if still giving silent orders. "You found the study," he rasped. "I did." "You kept everything," I said quietly. He smiled faintly. "That was all I had left of you." I sat down beside the bed, the weight of the letters heavy in my coat pocket. "Why didn't you send them?" He stared at the ceiling for a long moment. "Because every time I tried, I heard the blast again. The night we lost your mother. I thought if I kept you away from the war, maybe I could keep you whole. But then you found the fight yourself." I swallowed hard. "You could have trusted me." He turned his head slowly. "You were a child." "I'm not anymore." A soft, wheezing chuckle escaped him. "No, you're the Marine I raised without being there." That broke something in me. The anger didn't vanish. It shifted, becoming sorrow-wearing armor. "She loved you," he whispered. "Your mother. Enough to forgive me before she died. She believed peace would save us. I gave her protection instead." "Was she right?" He closed his eyes. "Always." I noticed then the locket on the nightstand, the same one I'd kept all these years. He reached for it, fingers trembling, and pressed it into my palm. "Your mother made me promise to give this back when it was safe." Inside, a tiny folded note rested beneath the tarnished metal. I opened it with care. "For EGM, always safe." The same handwriting, the same words. I stared at the locket for a long moment, then whispered, "I don't even know what home means." "Neither did I," he murmured. "Not until now." His breathing grew uneven. The nurse adjusted the tubing, but his gaze stayed fixed on mine. "Tell me something," he said. "When you salute, do you still feel pride?" I nodded, voice breaking. "Yes, sir, always." A faint smile ghosted across his lips. Then I did one thing right. The monitor's beeping faltered. I leaned closer, instinctively reaching for his hand. "Stay with me," I said, though I wasn't sure if it was an order or a plea. His eyes flickered. "You were never gone," he whispered, "even when you didn't see me." The next sound was a long, unbroken tone. The nurse moved quickly, checking his pulse, but I already knew. General Robert Morgan, soldier, father, ghost, was gone. Hayes placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Major." I nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the stillness before me. For years, I'd chased missions, medals, ranks, trying to prove I belonged to something. Now I realized I'd been chasing a name. I reached over and pressed the locket into his folded hands. "You can keep this," I whispered. "You finally earned it." Outside, the storm had passed. The air smelled of wet grass and the faint metallic tang of the sea. For the first time in my life, I saluted not out of duty, but out of love. "Rest easy, sir," I said softly. And this time, the words didn't sound like command. They sounded like forgiveness. The funeral was 3 days later, held under a gray Virginia sky that looked like it had been waiting decades for this day. The November air was still, that reverent quiet that only seems to exist in cemeteries and battlefields. Arlington stretched in every direction, neat white headstones forming endless rows of symmetry, like the order he'd lived his life by. I stood at the back, not in the family section, not among dignitaries, just another Marine in dress blues. No one knew who I was. That anonymity felt strangely right. My cover was tucked under my arm, my gloves cold against the folded flag I carried. The ceremony began with precision. Every movement practiced, every note of the hymn weighted with finality. Eternal Father, strong to save. The Navy hymn filled the air. Its verses about those in peril on the sea made me think of him, of duty, of the long, quiet ache between love and service. At the front, the honor guard moved with mechanical grace. I'd done funerals before. I'd folded flags for men I never met, for names read over static radios. But this one, was the first that made my throat tighten. Hayes stood across the field, his expression unreadable, the same calm professionalism that had greeted me that first day. When our eyes met, he gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement that everything between us had changed. The chaplain's voice carried across the field. General Robert A. Morgan served his country with courage, his family with sacrifice, and his God with humility. May his soul find peace. Peace. I wondered if that word could ever fit him. As the rifle volleys fired, I didn't flinch, but each shot felt like punctuation, 3 sharp endings to 3 decades of silence. Then the bugler raised his trumpet. Taps. The melody hung fragile in the air, trembling at the edges. I'd heard it 100 times, but never like this. When it ended, 2 Marines stepped forward, folding the flag from his casket with perfect precision, triangle by triangle, until only the stars remained. They handed it to a woman seated in the front row. I didn't recognize her. Later, Hayes would tell me she was the general's niece. The military needed someone for ceremony. I wasn't listed in any file that mattered. The flag passed hands, the prayers ended, and people began to drift away, whispering condolences they didn't mean. I stayed still. The earth smelled like rain and gunpowder. When the last of the crowd was gone, Hayes approached quietly. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I replied. "I didn't know if I had the right." He studied me for a moment. "You had more right than anyone here." He handed me a small velvet box. "He left this for you." Inside was a single silver bar, the insignia for a first lieutenant. On the back, engraved words, "For the daughter who outranked her father's fears." I swallowed hard. He really planned everything, didn't he? Hayes gave a faint smile. He planned as if he'd live forever, but he also planned for when he wouldn't. We stood in silence. The wind lifted a few stray leaves and set them adrift between the headstones. After a moment, he spoke again. He also recorded something. "For you." Said no one else should see it. He reached into his coat and handed me a small, unmarked USB drive. "What's on it?" He shook his head. "I didn't ask. I think he wanted you to decide when or if you were ready." I turned the drive over in my hand. It was light, almost weightless, but it felt heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. Later that evening, I sat in my hotel room, the folded flag draped across the bed like a final order waiting to be fulfilled. The city outside had gone quiet. The lamp threw a single pool of light over the small table where my laptop waited. For a long time, I just stared at the USB drive. The military teaches you to prepare for every outcome, but there's no briefing for the moment you face the ghost of your own bloodline. Finally, I slid it into the port. Static filled the screen for a moment, then cleared. The image flickered, and there he was, my father, sitting at the desk in that same study where I'd found his letters. He wore his uniform jacket, 4 stars gleaming faintly on the shoulders. His face was thinner, his voice hoarse but steady. "Elena," he said, looking straight into the camera, "if you're watching this, I'm gone." My pulse stuttered. I never found the courage to say these words while I was alive. I told myself it was duty, protocol, national security, but really, it was fear. I feared you'd hate me. I feared you'd see me as the man who took your life away. He drew a shallow breath. "I watched you grow into the Marine I always hoped to be. Every medal, every headline, every salute, I was there, even when you didn't see me. But that's not what I want you to remember. I want you to remember that you were loved. Fiercely, silently, endlessly." My throat burned. He paused, the weight of years etched into every line on his face. "If you ever doubt why I made those choices, look not at what I took, but at what you became. You're stronger than the secrets that shaped you. And if I taught you nothing else, I hope I taught you this. Honor isn't about being perfect. It's about carrying the truth, even when it hurts." He looked down, then back up. "Semper Fidelis, daughter. Always faithful." The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, the silence pressing in. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, faint and far away. I didn't cry right then. I just breathed, slow and steady, until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally stood, I folded the flag again, triangle by triangle, until it fit neatly in my arms. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt complete. The next morning, I drove to the Chesapeake Bay. The water stretched out, glassy and gray, the air sharp with salt. I stood at the pier, the flag still in my hands. For a while, I just watched the horizon. Then I whispered, "You can stand down now, sir. I've got it from here." The wind rose and carried the words away. 2 weeks after the funeral, the world felt strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, it haunts. Back at Camp Pendleton, my days blurred together. Morning drills, debriefs, endless paperwork. The sound of cadence outside my office usually steadied me, but now it felt like noise from someone else's life. The rhythm that once defined me had lost its beat. One morning, a package arrived with no return address. Brown paper, careful handwriting, sealed with old-fashioned wax. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. I recognized the slanted script instantly. Morgan. Inside was a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon, yellowed at the edges. A short note lay on top in Hayes' handwriting. These were found in the study after the estate was cleared. He wanted you to have them when you were ready. I wasn't ready, but I untied the ribbon anyway. The first letter was dated the year I turned 10. I saw your school picture today in the local paper. You lost a front tooth. You looked braver than I ever did at that age. I wanted to write you a story, but I don't have any heroes left except you. The next was from the year I enlisted. You saluted the flag before walking into the recruitment office. I was parked across the street. I almost called your name, but fear kept me silent. You deserved to walk in without ghosts trailing you. Then one from my first deployment. Your team calls you Steel. It suits you. You became everything I wished I could have been. I used to think I built my career out of courage, but it was fear that forged it. You, on the other hand, built yours out of survival. I'm proud of you, even if I don't have the right to be. By the fifth letter, my vision blurred. My hands were shaking so badly that one page tore at the fold. These weren't just apologies. They were proof that I hadn't been forgotten, not even once. One of the last letters was different, printed on newer paper, the ink still dark and fresh. Elena, this one isn't about me, it's about you. I've started a fund, the Morgan Scholarship for Military Orphans. I use my pension to create it. It's yours to run now, if you want it. Maybe that's how you'll understand what I couldn't say, that the pain we survive can still serve someone else. Enclosed were the official documents, foundation paperwork, signatures, a bank authorization. He'd turned guilt into a mission. I set the papers down and leaned back, closing my eyes. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel anger clawing at me. I just felt tired. The next weekend, I drove to Norfolk. The orphanage where I grew up had changed. It was now a youth center. The new sign out front read, Morgan Family Center, established 2010. Inside, the hallways had been painted bright colors, but I still recognized the bones of the building, the same corners I used to hide in, the same worn banister I once slid down when no one was watching. A woman at the front desk smiled when I entered. Can I help you, ma'am? I nodded toward the bronze plaque near the entrance. I just came to see the name, I said. She smiled knowingly. The general's daughter, right? He used to stop by. Not often, never stayed long, but he made sure we always had enough funding. Said he wanted to keep the lights on. I swallowed hard. He did more than that. I walked further down the corridor, the sound of laughter echoing from a playroom. Inside, a group of kids were coloring around a low table. A little girl with pigtails looked up at me, eyes bright. Are you a real Marine? She asked. I smiled. I am. Wow, she said. My dad's one too. He's far away right now. I knelt beside her. Then you must be brave, you know that? She nodded solemnly, the way children do when they want to believe you. He says when he comes home, we're going to have a house with a yard. I felt something twist in my chest. That sounds perfect. When I stood, one of the staff members, a woman in her 50s, met me at the door. We've been meaning to ask, she said. Would you ever come back to talk to the kids? They could use someone like you. I looked around. The laughter, the crayons, the sunlight filtering through the same windows that once trapped me in gray. I think I just might, I said. Back in my hotel room that evening, I unfolded the last of the letters. It was dated a week before he died. Elena, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I do ask for understanding. I can't give you back the years I stole, but maybe I can give you something that lasts longer than regret. When you stand before those children, remember, they'll look at you the way I once looked at your mother, as proof that light can survive the storm. Don't let my mistakes define you. Let them remind you what kind of leader never hides from love or truth. You were always meant to lead, not just Marines, but hearts. Semper Fi, my daughter. The words blurred as I read them. For once, I didn't fight the tears. I let them fall, quiet, uncontrolled, honest. I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. You were right, I whispered. Pain can serve someone else, maybe even me. That night, for the first time in years, I dreamed of my mother. She was standing on a beach at sunrise, holding a small child wrapped in white. She smiled, not at me, but through me, as if to say, now you understand. When I woke, the locket on my nightstand caught the light. Inside it, the tiny note waited, for EGM, always safe. I smiled faintly. Maybe now I finally was. A year passed before I realized the house, the grief, even the silence, no longer haunted me. They'd become part of my story, not the wound, but the scar that proved I healed. I stayed in the Corps, but my duties changed. No more combat deployments, no more late-night briefings over satellite feeds. I was reassigned to Veteran and Community Outreach, a program that worked with schools and youth centers. Instead of leading missions, I led conversations. Instead of strategy, I spoke about purpose, resilience, and what service really meant beyond rank or medals. The first few months were difficult. Every auditorium, every classroom, I felt that old instinct to armor myself, to speak like a soldier, not a person. But over time, I realized these weren't after-action reports. They were bridges between the person I'd been and the one my father believed I could become. Then came the invitation. The Morgan Family Center was hosting a dedication ceremony for its first class of scholarship recipients, 12 young men and women, all former orphans who'd earned acceptance into the Naval Academy or the Marines. The foundation my father built, the one I now ran, had grown faster than anyone expected. The director called me personally. "They'd like you to speak," she said. For a long time, I just stared at the phone in silence before answering. "Yes, I'll be there." It was a mild spring afternoon in Norfolk when I arrived. The center looked different now. Fresh paint, bright banners, and a courtyard blooming with early cherry blossoms. The plaque by the entrance read, "In memory of General Robert A. Morgan and Laura E. Morgan. For the children who will never be forgotten." The director met me with a warm smile. "Major Morgan," she said proudly, "we're honored." I wasn't used to hearing that last name spoken aloud. Not as Carter, not as a call sign, but as Morgan. For once, it didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned. The small auditorium was filled with uniforms, new cadets, instructors, families, and local veterans. When I stepped onto the stage, the murmurs quieted. The director's voice rang out. "Please welcome Major Elena Morgan, whose courage and story inspired this legacy." I took a breath, feeling the weight of all the eyes on me. Normally, public speaking didn't scare me, but this time my heart thudded in my chest. I looked at the young recruits seated in the front row, their shoulders squared, their faces full of nervous pride, and saw pieces of myself in each of them. "My father," I began, "was a Marine who made mistakes." The room went still. "Some you'll read about in history books, most you'll never hear. But the biggest one wasn't about combat or command. It was about silence." I let the words sink in. He believed protecting someone meant keeping them in the dark. He thought distance was safety. But what I learned, what he eventually taught me, is that love doesn't hide behind secrecy. Real courage means telling the truth, even when it hurts. I paused, scanning the faces in front of me. Some uncertain, some teary-eyed. You'll learn soon enough that loyalty and orders matter. But integrity, that's what makes you worthy of them. My father taught me that honor isn't about being perfect. It's about carrying the truth, even when it's heavy. In my breast pocket, I felt the cool edge of the silver star I now wore, the one he'd left for when she's ready. "I used to think my father was a coward," I continued. "But now I understand he was human. He made an impossible choice, and in his own flawed way, he never stopped trying to make it right." The air felt charged, alive. I saw a young Marine in the front row, a girl barely 19, freckles across her nose, raise her hand timidly. "Ma'am," she asked, voice shaking, "did you ever really forgive him?" The question hung in the room, raw and honest. I thought of the study, the letters, the locket. I thought of the man who died whispering my name. "Yes," I said softly, "because forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me." The girl nodded, eyes shining. "I think I get it." "Good," I said. "That means you're already stronger than I was." After the ceremony, I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. The cherry trees were in bloom there too, pale petals drifting across the rows of marble headstones. The air was still and golden, the kind of afternoon that hums with memory. I found his grave easily. I always did. Someone had left a Marine coin on top of the stone. I smiled faintly. The inscription read, "General Robert A. Morgan, United States Marine Corps. Beloved husband, father, and soldier." I knelt, placed my cover beside me, and brushed away a few fallen petals. "Hey, Dad," I whispered. "The scholarship's working. You'd be proud." The wind shifted, scattering the petals, carrying the scent of grass and rain. I traced my fingers over the word father. "I used to hate you," I admitted quietly. "I thought you were a coward. but now I think you were just trying to do the best you knew how. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out 2 dog tags, his and mine. They clinked softly together in my palm, metal against metal, a heartbeat between generations. I kept my promise, I said. I carried the name. I carried the truth. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in amber light. I stood, brushed the dirt from my knees, and saluted. It wasn't formal, no stiffness, no rank. It was a daughter's salute. As I turned to leave, a small boy standing with his mother nearby tugged on my sleeve. "Was that your dad?" he asked. I smiled. "Yeah," I said, "he was." The boy grinned shyly. "He must have been a good one." I looked back at the grave. "Eventually," I said softly. That night, back at my hotel, I sat by the window with my laptop open to the Marine Corps' community page. The cursor blinked on a blank post. I began to type. Some wounds don't heal with time, they heal with understanding. I learned that forgiveness is the final act of courage. If you've lost someone you never truly knew, don't let the silence win. Reach out, speak, remember. I hit post before I could second guess it. By morning, the message had gone viral, shared by veterans, families, even strangers, who saw themselves somewhere in the story. Dozens of comments filled the page, stories of reconciliation, letters unsent, fathers and daughters reaching out after years of silence. I read every single one. Each one felt like a small act of healing, not just for them, but for me too. When I finally closed the laptop, I glanced at the folded flag on the chair beside my bed, the one from his casket, the one I still couldn't let go of. I ran my hand over the fabric, tracing the stitched stars. The words came out in a whisper, the same ones that had begun everything, the call that had once broken my world. "The lawyer called me at work," I murmured. But this time, instead of bitterness, a smile touched my lips. Because that call hadn't just shattered my life, it had rebuilt it. I looked out the window, the city lights flickering like Morse code against the night sky, and whispered, "Semper Fi, Dad. We're both finally home."